Welcome, guys, to another live episode. So today's episode is going to be a very, very interesting one. We're going to be talking about a few things, and let's get my microphone all fixed up there. So first off, if it's your first time tuning in, just do me a favor, go ahead and hit the like button, go ahead and hit the subscribe button as well. And also, if you're watching on Spotify, go ahead and hit the follow button as well. So today we're going to be talking about a few things. So as you guys know, we talk about everything business, we talk about making money, we talk about everything that you need to know to go ahead and get yourself straight, get your business straight, and obviously, live a better, more happy and fulfilling life. So first thing first, we're going to be talking about a few things today. We're going to be talking about passive income. We're going to be talking about the fact that most people, 39% of people, need extra money. 39%. Think about it. I want you guys to think about this. 39% of Americans need extra income. They're working a side hustle. Like, for instance, I was talking to an acquaintance of mine, and he was like, we're kind of chit-chatting, they're going back and forth, and his wife is a nurse, and also, has a side hustle business to basically help grow, provide extra income for the family, right? That's the same thing. He also kind of pretty much for the most part has an extra a side hustle for the most part. So, I mean, there's this whole side hustle craze that's going on. So let's actually go ahead and do a few things. So one thing first, guys, I want to go ahead and show you guys this statistic, which is a very interesting stat. Bank rates. So this is basically a survey that 39% of people have a side hustle and 44% of people believe they'll always need one. So let's think about it this way, guys. 39% have a side hustle and 44% of people believe that they'll always need one. So if we kind of go ahead a little bit and dive a little deeper here. So a few things to think about is the side hustles are bringing in hundreds of dollars a month for the average person. Now, if you factor in inflation, is it really making a difference anymore? Are we really in a point in which, if we're looking at a point in which inflation is, for the most part, currently they're saying inflation is about 4%, something like that. But I personally believe it's actually much way higher. But if you look at it from a perspective of most people making an average of $810 extra per month, that $810 can pretty much go into things like your bills. That could be going too much into things like date night with your spouse. That could be going into, just the basic, simple things, simple nuances of life. But if you look at it for as far as how much time do you actually have to invest into that side hustle? How much time do you have to invest in that extra, to make that extra $810 a month, right? So if we kind of look at it from that statistic, we go ahead. So side hustles basically, it's next for most people because 33% of side hustles say they need the extra money for day-to-day living expenses. In comparison, 27 people say they need it for discretionary spending money, and 25% need it for savings, and 12% need to repay debt, right? So there's various reasons why people need it, but the most important thing is most people need extra money. Now, if you've been around, if you've been listed in there, there's this whole thing of like, oh my God, I want passive income. I want passive income. I need that passive money, right? Everyone's talking about passive income, passive income, passive income. Well, first off, we're going to look at it today, and you guys be the judge of it. Do you actually believe that passive income is actually truly passive? Is there actually such a thing as passive income? Is passive income really a thing? Is passive income really a thing? Is there a thing with like people like, yeah, man, if I could just find a way to make $1 million in passive income, I'll be good. I'll be good for my life. If I made $1 million, I never have to work a day in my life. And the universe is like, well, that's why you don't have it. Because you're going from a perspective that, everything's passive. And the reality is, if you're an able-bodied person, you put on earth to work, there's no reason why you shouldn't be working. I mean, there's working hard and there's working smart. But the whole concept of passive income, that's something that's kind of a little bit questionable here, right? So we're kind of diving a little deeper. We're just looking at side hustle, in fact. So side hustle is more commonly necessary for lower income workers. 42% of side hustlers with a household income of under $50,000 a year say they need a side hustle. Now, then again, yes and no. I don't think everybody who has a side hustle from the perspective of, low income. But I would say this is, if you're making less than 50 grand a year, I wasn't a point. I'll tell you guys this, which is interesting. So a lot of people watch and don't really know the backstory, right? So I worked a job that was paying me $300 a month. So for context, $300 a month, if you multiply it in a 12-month multiple, was about $3,600 a year. $3,600 a year. I lived on $3,600 a year. Now, most people might look at that like, dude, how are you able to survive? Honestly, I'm just going to say it's the grace of God. But I want you to think about it from that perspective of, I had that job that's paying me $1,300 a year, and I took another job that's paying me $10 an hour. I worked as many hours as I possibly could for that job. I would do 10. I'll work in the job I was working at, and then in the weekends I'll go work more. So I was working 7 days a week. I was trying to work extra to be able to make extra money, right? So I had pretty much 2 jobs for the most part. I'm going to say this is the key difference between how I was able to change my income was not necessarily changing my income from a perspective of like, yes, I want to go ahead and get another job. The reality you have to look at about it is you learn what you earn. Okay, I want you to look at it from that perspective. You learn what you earn. So, for instance, if you're earning under 50 grand a year, then it's because of what you're learning. You're learning capacity. You haven't learned enough to make yourself 100, 150 grand. Now you'd be like, Emmanuel, what are you talking about? There's like, I've been at this job for 5 years and they haven't paid me. Did not pay me that much. Well, in reality, you got to look at it from a perspective of you are paid in direct proportion to the difficulty that there is in replacing you and the value that they believe you provide, right? If you come in a position in which you're like, that's why most people would say if you have a PhD, you get paid higher. I personally am not a big believer in higher in college education, college, because I personally just don't believe in unless you go into STEM fields, going to get engineering degree, medical degree, all that stuff. That's valuable, but I'm not talking bad about anybody else's degree. But for the most part, I just don't believe in traditional college, right? So that's me. But you got to look at it from your perspective of how I want you to look at it from the perspective of you need to be able to invest in your education, such as self learning. Self learning is the most important thing. Could you go learn a trade? Go learn a trade. If you have to learn a trade, go learn a trade. But your first thing first, you have to get in a perspective in which you're making way more money before you can be able to invest that money. Because what I'm going to be sharing with you guys is I'm going to be talking to you guys about how I intend to do an Airbnb business. And obviously, how my recommendations, you can take it with a grain of salt. You can take it or leave it. It's completely up to you. But you guys know, we're pretty much, this podcast is called the Evolution Podcast. So, this is a solo session with me, just basically having a chit chat with you guys here, right? But if we kind of go ahead and dive back into that statistic here. So side hustles may not be just a temporary solution for some Americans. 20%, 8% of those with a side hustle believe they'll always need one to make ends meet, right? So half of millennials and more Gen Zers, pretty much half of millennials and more than half of Gen Zers have a side hustle in 2023. So you can look at the stats, look at the data here. So if you look at it here, we ask, other than your main source of income, do you personally do anything to earn extra income on the side? So 39% of people say they do, and 61% of people say they don't. Now, does that mean that the 60% of people that don't, does it mean that they're not making that much money? No, they actually are. But then again, we don't know what the stats are behind people's personal life. It honestly all depends on whatever they need. They need that extra money from, right? But you look at the 39% here. So less than one quarter, 25% of baby boomers, 59% say they have a side hustle, which is insane. In which you're 59 to 77, you have a side hustle, which kind of it makes you understand that the retirement system, and I covered this in a previous video, and I've said it in the past, you guys got to come on it from a perspective of whole work 40 years, retired at age 65. It's a very exciting concept if you believe on a very eco community system, basically. I feel like I just made a new word, but I probably just made a new word. So the whole concept of retire 65, I want to kind of for this, I'm going to kind of dive into a board. I know I was going to talk about, the intention was initially to talk about, what do you call it, Airbnb stuff, right? We're gonna dive into that. But this is pretty much a lie. This is pretty much a podcast. This is a live stream, so I can pretty much, go off script here for a little bit. But I want you guys to look at it from a perspective of the whole retired 65. So now let's look at it as a census to you get into the workforce at age 25, which means you come with a 4-year degree and your income raises to the expectation of about 4%, right? So let's say about a 4% a yearly increase in salary, or maybe a 4% because the average inflation is around 2.1% is where the standard inflation is. So usually to beat inflation, there's about a 3 to 4%, depends on wherever it is that you're working at, right? But let's look at it from a perspective. Let's look at it from the stats, right? Of majority of people, if you look at it, most people usually have anything from $200 to $270,000 in 401k, which people use 401k for the purpose of retirement, for the purpose of yeah, that's it. I'm 65. The average life expectancy is around 79. I believe it's 79 years old. 79 or 77.6. I believe that's the number. But you retire, you live out the rest of the next 12 to 15 years off of the money that you saved up. But now here's the problem. The problem is most people end up living longer than they actually, plan to live. And usually the money ends up running out. Because if you have 200,000 saved up and your living expenses are literally costing you, let's say your living expenses is costing you roughly out of your 270 grand, costing you about 30 grand a year. If it's costing you 30 grand a year, you do the math. That's how much? 30 times 7. That's 270 divided by, that's 9, I believe. 270 divided by 30. I believe that's 9. Yeah, that's 9. So you have 9 years, right? Okay, that's good. If you can reduce your expenses to 30 grand a year, which is roughly about what, 1900 to 2100, I believe, per on a monthly basis, right? That's pretty good. But if you look at it as to most people, not a lot of people, a small percentage of people end up actually having a 401k of $250 to $270,000 per year. Okay, so think about that. So not a lot of people end up having 250, 270 grand. Most people don't even have, I've spoken to a lot of people that are like close to retirement. They're like, yeah, I have 40 grand in savings, or I have 50 grand in savings, I have 55 grand in savings, because the reality is life is expensive. If you have to raise kids, anybody who knows, because you got to think about it. If you enter the workforce, because most people got to think about it, most people need two incomes. If you enter the workforce at age 25, the average age of, let's look at it, the average age person gets married. This is an interesting stat that I actually want to look at. Look at the average age in 1920, 21, 24. Today's average national age is 29 and 31. So let's say 29 and 31. So we'll just say 29 years old. I know a few people that have gotten married a little younger, so we'll just say 29 years old. So let's say you get married at 29. So that's roughly 4 years after you get into retirement. Usually what ends up happening after is people start having kids, and you got to raise them for what, 18 years. So which means to age 49. And everybody knows, well, not 49, but close to that. But to age, if you get them at 30, 38, so I'll just go 49, because usually the baby comes out 30, 31. So if you look at it from age 49, kids are out the house, you moved out, you're in your 40s. Now you got to think about it from a perspective of, you have to pay for college, you have to pay for your kids' college, you have to fund your life, you have to pretty much take care of them, you have to do all this stuff. Now, usually what ends up happening is, where's most of that money coming from? This money is coming from the money that you saved up, right? So you have less ability to save, especially when you have kids, as you do if you were like to say in a position of like you were going to be a single person, a single individual, single man, single girl, a single person overall. But if you are in a position where in which you're going to raise a family, then your projected savings is actually going to decrease based off the fact that you're actually going to have more kids, unless you're actually learning more and you're getting a raise and getting more raises and improving your value that you provide to your employer or to your customers, right? Because your customers are your employees at the same time, at the same position, right? So you get to pretty much pick whichever, right? Now, when you look at that from that perspective, it's to most people don't end up having that much money in savings, right? Just based off of the fact that life pretty much does happen, and you don't know, what else is out there that might happen. But if we kind of dive a little deeper here, so less than one quarter, 24% of baby boomers, 5977 say they have a side hustle, which is interesting. The six people who put 5977 have a side hustle. They say they have a side hustle. The smallest percentage of any generation, slightly more, 40% of Gen Xers, age 40 to 35 say they have a side hustle. Okay. So the gap between annual income brackets is smaller than other demographics, but generally those with household income over 100,000 are most likely to have a side hustle. Okay, so which is interesting. So people 100,000 and over, 45% have a side hustle. Between 80,000 and 99,000, 35% have a side hustle. Between 50,000 and 79,999, 39% have a side hustle, and under 50,000, 40% have a side hustle. So Americans make an average, obviously, $810 per month from side hustle. It's most commonly, we can dive into the math here, but basically, based on the survey, they asked on average, how much income would you say you earn in a month from your side hustle, right? And 28% say they make 28%. Look at this, per month. 28% say they make $1 to $50 in side hustle. Okay, I won't call it a side hustle. I'll call it a charity. And we have 14% that say they make between $51 to $100, and we have 11% that say they make between $101 to $200, and we have 6% that say they make between $201 to $300. And if you dive into the math, only about 8% of people say they make more than $2,000 in their side hustle, right? So basically, if you look at the math, most people are not making money in side hustles, right? So it's just like Emmanuel, this is supposed to be an Airbnb talk. Listen, guys, we're gonna get into it. I want you guys to we're gonna get into that. So if 1 in 3 people with side hustle need the funds for day-to-day expenses, so these side hustles just aren't so Americans. 1 in 3%, which is 33% of side hustlers, need income for regular living expenses. So basically, the survey asks, which one of the following best describes how you use the extra money for your side hustle? 35% said they needed for income, regular living expenses, 27% discretionary, 25% income for savings, and then you have people paying off debt for about 12%, right? So if we dive deeper, right? If we dive deeper, we can basically you see more stats as to basically the fact that there is this huge need for the side hustle. There's this huge need for extra income, because some people, if you gave them, let's say we live in a very socialistic system, right? And you give them basically everything that they need, most people won't work, right? And if they won't work, to each their own. But for the most part, if they won't work, then there's no need for side hustle. Most people end up putting the extra time because you need to take care of your family. You need to take care of those people that are important to you, and hence the reason where a side hustle pretty much comes into place because there's that extra need to pretty much, oh, you know what, I got to take care of my friends, I got to take care of my family, I got to take care of those who I care about, I got to make sure that they are squared away, I got to make sure that they're taken care of, I got to make sure that everything's straight with them, right? So those are kind of key concepts when you're looking at, do people who actually are kind of like in the process of, getting side hustles, right? But 41% of Americans are barely getting by, which pretty much, like I said, for you to have a side hustle, you got to have a main job that's not paying you enough for you to say, you know what, I want to get a side hustle. I want to get in a position in which, I'm having to, work another job, right? So let's look at it from a perspective of, why are people getting into side hustles? What is the concept? What's the key reasons why people are like, you know what, I want to get in a side hustle. There was this need for a side hustle. Let's look at it from this key stats, basically this key stats here. So here we have, that's not what I'm looking for. So we're looking here from this numbers here. So there we go. It'd be nice if the stuff would actually reload here. Let me get this stuff. There we go. All right. Let's accept the cookies so you can track me. So we're looking at this. This is from the WF. So it's basically just cost of living, and this is just going to show the cost of living chart. So of course, economics, basically they say that, economics is, they've warned that the US is on the verge of a cost of living crisis due to rapid inflation. Actually, I personally do agree with that there's a cost of living crisis coming up because things are kind of getting up there. The current inflation rate in the US, if you look at the inflation rate in the US right now, they said right now it's 3.18%, but the reason why it's 3.18%, if you look at it, is because interest rates are going up. So which means if interest rates are going up, then most people are either buying debt at a that's becoming very, very expensive. That's basically the best way to put it, is because it's literally getting expensive. But I want you guys to, I want to show this statistic data here. Let me see if I can pull this up really quickly. So there's a statistic data here, provided my computer loads. So the statistic data here just basically showing the trend of how inflation basically, from obviously here you had 2020, you had inflation about this rate, and then you had it skyrocketed right around mid 2022 at about 9.1%, which that 9.1%. I want you to think about it, that unless you're investing in a stock market, investing somewhere, and you're earning an interest of at least greater than 9%, then you're losing. Just think about it from the perspective, for every $10 that you put out, you're losing about 9 cents. For every $100 that you put out, you're looking at losing about 90 cents. Okay. Is it 90 cents? 9%. Yeah. So 9%. Yeah. 9%. Yeah. So whatever the math is, just subtract 10%. 10% of $100 is $10. So all right, $9. Yeah, you're losing $9. For every $100, you're losing $9. There goes my math. Someone's gonna talk about it. I'm like, Emmanuel, your math sucks. Yeah, kind of does. But using about 9%. So that's basically if you factor in inflation. So which means inflation is like how would I put it? It's like lighting your money on fire. That's what inflation is, right? So you're burning it. So that's why if you're doing a traditional savings, most people aren't making that much money. Hence the reason why most people are like, they got to work extra jobs, they got to work more, they got to do much more to go ahead and make any an extra living for the most part, right? So that's basically why the cost of living is going up, because if people are having to, if inflation is that high, then what does that mean? That means that most businesses are raising their prices. If businesses are raising the prices are basically being fallen, being put on the customer there. So you as the customer are basically the one that's having to bear the burden of pretty much, having to pay, for, let's say you're buying pizza, the pizza costs $7, and now you're paying $12-13 for that same pizza. That's inflation. So food prices increased by 9.4% on average in the year to April, the largest 12 months in the last 40 years. What that means is, in the last 40 years, food price has gone up. I remember when there was a phase where everyone was like, eggs are expensive, and I still believe that to this day, probably eggs are expensive, but 16% of Americans say that they are struggling financially, compared with 66% of people. I mean, this is comparison. I think this is kind of comparing apples to oranges. It's not really comparing. It should the data should be pretty much looking at data from how America was to how America is now, versus comparing Americans to people who live in Turkey, because it's a completely different world, right? So if you look at it from a perspective of average price, and I mean, this is just basically talking more about inflation numbers and how, basically, and also talking about the consumer price and index, which is kind of a conversation for another day. But the way I want to talk about is people's current financial situation, right? So if you look at the stats, so this is a chart basically saying, how well would you say you're managing financially these days? So you have 24% of people in the US say they're living comfortably, as opposed to 12% in Germany, which is still not bad. If you actually look at it from a perspective of, if you look at compared to Germany, Australia, Canada, Britain, France, Spain, Japan, Chapon. So you look at it from the perspective of, okay, so 24% are doing living comfortably. But then if you're looking at it compared to Turkey, 7% live comfortably and 37% are finding it difficult, right? Versus in the US, about 7% find it very difficult. So you can look at it from a perspective of 25 points plus 9, looking 36 plus 7, you're looking at 43. So 43% of Americans are kind of in a point in which they're getting by and they're also kind of struggling as well. So that's where the number kind of comes in of like 43% are pretty much struggling, right? But if you look at it from a perspective as well, I know we're kind of getting a little deeper, but we're going to get to the meat of it. We're going to get to the meat of it, right? This is kind of what I want you to show you here is based on data. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? For some reason, everybody's trying to track you. Jesus. Okay, so based on the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more than 400,000 Americans work 2 full-time jobs. Okay, so in September, 4.9% of all the more than 164 million U.S. workers held 2 or more jobs. Okay, this is super conflicting and confusing, but it says in September 2022, 4.9% of all the more than 164 million U.S. workers held 2 or more job positions. That's 7.7 million people that work 2 jobs as of September. So 7.7 million that work 2 jobs. So there's this need where there's this, 4.9%. So which means these are people who are like, I got to take the initiative. I got to go out there. I got to work some more because I have a family to feed and I got to go ahead and take care of my family. And if that's you, that's probably you, right? But basically, which means that the need for more money is a must. And most people are looking for passive income and basically, or income that doesn't necessarily require a lot much more work. And that's where pretty much I came into the point as to Airbnb, and I'm like, that's something that's interesting. I've stayed in Airbnbs. I'm staying in Airbnb, booking a trip in a few months, and I'm like, you know what, this is fascinating. So I'm like, I wanted to talk about it. So let's look at it from a perspective of Airbnb, because based on the stats and what I found is basically Airbnb hosts collected an average of about 150 billion USD since inception. Okay, 150 billion US dollars. I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say that one more. We're gonna look at this stats here, right? So Airbnb statistics. So this is kind of just going over the Airbnb statistics indicate the travel booking site was recovered from, obviously, since pandemic happened and most people there wasn't that much travel. But corporate revenue for Airbnb is good. Airbnb's value is 70 billion as of August 2022, which is kind of a little down from 34.3% last year. Okay, not 34. So the average Airbnb host makes about $13,800 in 2021. Now we do the math. We do the math, right? So we did the math, and based on the math that we did there, we did the math, and we found out that the average person is making about, if you're good, you're making about 810 per month, and if you did the math over a 12-month period, that means that would be about a math of 810 times 12 would be a math of about 9,720 US dollars, right? So it'd be about 9,720 US dollars would be the math if you're looking at the math right there, right? But we come back into the statistics here. So which means if you host an Airbnb, you're actually making more money. But over 60% of US hosts say they rent out their primary home while they're on vacation, which is a good way to be cash flow and having pay off your rent. And over 4 million hosts have 6 million listings on Airbnb. Okay. So we can look at the booking statistics here, but kind of let's look at it from a perspective of, because if you're going to start a business, you got to understand it. You need to look at the statistics from what are the guests doing? What are your customers? Because your customers are the people that are paying your bills, right? So you got to look at it from a perspective. So more guests are booking longer stays, indicating a market among digital nomads. Guests were 18.4% more likely to stay in their Airbnb for at least a week in 2021 compared to 2019. So 18.4% people. So which means, and the reason why that is because there's a lot more people who are working from home, and there's a lot of people that don't have to go into their physical jobs. So in 2019, there was this whole, you got to go to work. And now after everything happened, most people like returning, they don't need to return back to work because it's actually more cost efficient for the employer to keep them staying at home and then have to pay $2 million for an office space, right? Over 1 year, 100,000 guests stayed in the same Airbnb for over 3 months. 54% of Airbnb guests female. Okay, 36% of 25 and 34, so which means you have the millennials and Gen Zs. They want that liberty and that freedom. So hence, you got to look at it from that perspective of you start an Airbnb business, you got to be looking at it from your target demographic. You got to be looking about age 25 and 34. So 15% are between 18 and 24, and 13% are age 55 and older. So they're doing it more as a retirement home. So you got to think about it. So the way I think about it is, if I'm appealing, if 36%, so which means the high demographic between the ages of 25 and 34, then what I want to be picking up, I want to pick up Airbnb in vacation places, but I also want to be picking up things in which location is key in real estate. Everybody knows that location is key. So let's say I have an Airbnb that's kind of by the coast, right? Let's say I have something in the Carolinas, or I have something in the western shores of Florida or the eastern shores of Florida. let's say the Western Shores of Florida. Let's say I'm looking at maybe Clearwater, Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater, right? If you're not familiar with Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater, let me see if I can pull up a map of Florida here. Because I think if I pull up the map, you guys will be able to kind of. So this is kind of where this is where, if you look at it from perspective, this is it right here. So this is like that area right here. So this is the Gulf, and then you have it just about right here. You look at the Tampa, so it's kind of like Tampa, St. Pete. So St. Pete is kind of like where you're looking at close to water, but Tampa you kind of have the bay and all that stuff. You have the Tampa Bay, right? But you got to look at it from that perspective of, okay, so if I'm looking at it from that perspective, what are the few things that I'm going to need if I'm having guests that are 25 to 34? Okay, so if my guests are between the ages of 25 and 34, so a few things I'm going to need. One, I want to make sure that the school system, right? I want to make, let's say they're on vacation, school. Okay, let's say if I want to rent out something that's more in the school time, right? School time, school, or I can also pay attention to, kids, like things that, activities that they can do with kids, right? So activities play a role, right? How close is the nearest Starbucks? All right. This is you got to look at it. Starbucks, Target's another one, right? You got to look at it from how close is the nearest Target, right? Those are the key areas that you got to want to kind of be looking at. Okay, where are the closest amenities that they're going to use? Because if I'm like, hey, now I can advertise my listing, and I'm like, I can be in my listing, I can be like, 2 miles from the beach. My handwriting is not the best, guys, and I'm writing on a laptop. Okay, so we have 2 miles from the beach, and we have, I would say, 2 miles from Target. So someone's like, whoa, okay, so we know our Airbnb is within 2 miles from Target, and you could be like 2 miles from, you know the Cinemark or something, right? So now they have date night, right? Because there's probably going to be a couple, right? So you got to look at it from a perspective of, okay, so these are a few things that kind of play a role as to what are the amenities and activities. You got to think about it from the customer's perspective of what do they like to do, right? So those are kind of a few key concepts to kind of take into account there if you're looking at the Airbnb statistics there. So, and you think about it also, 95% of surveyed guests choose Airbnb for ease and security of payment. I personally would say Airbnb, but I have. Hotels is cool, pretty cool, especially if I can get a suite, but Airbnb is not bad. 86% say the location of the Airbnb is more convenient than a hotel. Okay, 77% want to live like locals. All right, so you got to have that local feel. And 64% agree that home sharing is more ecological or environmentally friendly. Honestly, I don't know how that is, but I feel like just toss that in there. And 43% indicate functionality is the top amenity. So you can kind of look at it. Now, let's look at it from a perspective of the host. You are the host now. You're the person which is coming in there, and you're the person now that's going to be basically putting your money out there, right? So Airbnb host statistics. So women are more likely to register as hosts and are consistently rated as the best host on Airbnb. So take note on that. So if you're a married guy, have your wife run it. If you're somebody who's like, that's hire Airbnb management company. I don't know, whatever it is that you got to do there. But you want to make sure, you got to understand when it comes to Airbnb. I remember I stayed at this one terrible Airbnb in LA. This was probably back in 18 or 17. Oh my God. I remember this Airbnb was not the best Airbnb, because I remember we got it, which I'm going to say this, guys, is I'm not going to say anything about LA, but this is my experience. Land airport, went to LA. So got to LA, you went to the rental car. I'm going to say this. The cheapest rental car, the cheapest rental car, when you look at it, it's like $11, $13, $15, $20, $25. I was like, oh, cheap. You buy it, and then you get to the airport, and you're like, where's the rental drop? Oh, he's like, yeah, it's 20 miles away. And then you get in they have a shuttle that comes every 5 hours. Just kidding. But then you take it to this tent, and then it's not a tent, but you get there, and then you start adding up on this. Okay, sir. Okay, so it's $25. You're gonna need this. This is not included. And then literally they end up raising the price more. And then now you're basically paying, $80 a day or $9 a day. And then if you're going to like a tourist destination like LA, then you get also charged tourist. I think I was charged. What was I charged again? It was tourist taxes, or tourist something. You get charged some tourist stuff on top of that. So now they're trying to make extra money off of you now. So you get charged all that stuff. Okay, so I was like, fine. Drove to the what'd you call it? Drove to the Airbnb, and then I show up. It's obviously it's a house, right? Because people went to your house. Get a community. Could barely get in there. Got in there. The place was half clean, right? The bed looked like it was not as advertised, and I was like, why am I here? Right? That was my one Airbnb experience, right? And then it just I'm not a I didn't leave a review because I'm like, I'm not going to leave a negative review. I'm not that kind of person. I was like, that's fine. But I'm going to say this is cleanliness is key. All right. Make sure that you have an Airbnb. If you have an Airbnb, make sure you have an Airbnb that is clean. Okay. A clean Airbnb, not an Airbnb where people are going to be like, ugh, oh my God, I don't want to go in there. Jeez. What kind of Airbnb is this? Right. You don't want to kind of have a nasty, you don't want to be nasty. Okay. You don't want to be nasty. Don't be nasty. Okay. Listen, don't be nasty. Okay. 85% of hotels are located outside the United States, which is interesting. And reason why most 80% of 85% are located outside is because obviously you got to look at it from perspective of they're also doing um what's the word I was looking for again? They also basically just, it's more tourists. Like if you live in Mexico, you're like, oh, I'm in Tulum, or you're, or somewhere else, you're like out in the islands, you can Airbnb stuff, right? And nationwide, the average host earns about $99 per night for a private room with up to two guests, okay, which is good. The average host earns about $13,800 annually, and over 60% of hosts in the US say they rent out their primary residence while they're on vacation. And then obviously, as you see, you can go and look at the statistics, but 20% of hosts indicate they chose to host after first being an Airbnb guest. Okay, so which is interesting, right? So now we're going to kind of look into, we're not going to dive too much deeper into this. We're going to actually look at the math, right? One thing I want to do is, guys, we got to math the math. We're going to be wrapping up here shortly because you guys know it's a solo podcast. And when I have guests, we go longer. When it's a solo podcast, we kind of keep it a little short, right? So we look at it as a revenue calculator. Look at it as a projected revenue calculator, and then we're going to look at this calculator here. You guys can find this calculator. Let me just log in here really quickly, and then once I log in, we'll be able to pretty much dive into basically using the revenue calculator. But you can go to what's it called? You can go to analytics.alltheroom.com. Alltheroom. Yeah, I think that's the one. Alltherooms.com, and you'll be able to pretty much find a calculator, right? So what it allows you to do is it allows you to pretty much run calculations based on location. So let's say I wanted to have an Airbnb in Tampa. Right. So remember, guys, we're talking about Tampa. So let's say I want an Airbnb in Tampa. I've got 2 rooms, 1 bath, and I'm expecting 4 guests. Right. Calculate revenue. So what it does is it projects based off of the just use historical data to give you. Now you got to be a paid member for this, but then it would give you some more data as far as like explore the market, explore the county, the zip codes, the downtown to kind of see what the location looks like. Right. But based on everything right now, the rental revenue is about roughly you're looking at about 25,817, but this is on an annual basis. It's anticipating an occupancy of 37%. Okay, so it's anticipating an occupancy of roughly about 37%. Now, if we're looking at something like, let's say I want to do an Airbnb in Miami, Florida, right? So let's go ahead and say, and let's say I have 4 rooms and I have 3 beds, and I'm expecting 7 guests, right? Something like that. So occupancy, so average daily rate. So think about this. Average daily rate is $548, 40% occupancy, $80,000 is a projected annual revenue. Now, this is annual revenue. Also, you got to separate the fact as to how much is it going to cost you to operate it. Okay, then you can pretty much go ahead and look at your expenses. So right now, it's looking at it as your net operating expenses is going to be about $8,000, $8,047, which is pretty cool. And then net operating income, your net income is about $72,426. So that's kind of the but you got to also look at it like if I want to do something in, like, let me see, Boise. If I go to Boise, Idaho, right? Not saying Boise's bad, but let's say we do the same thing. Now look at the rental revenue is 36,109, 217 daily rate, 45%. So you gotta look at it. The location can allow you to be able to charge more for the rates, right? So I'm going to look at it from this perspective. Now, the reason why I'm going to say this, now a lot of people are going to go, Emmanuel, well, I don't believe in Airbnb. I'm not an Airbnb guy. Absolutely not. No Airbnb for me. I am strictly just rental property. I just want to rent my house out. I just want to buy, hold, and rent and have them pay off my debt. I don't like people coming to my house. Oh God, you don't know what they do. They come in your house, they stay in the bed. You have no clue what you're gonna, you don't want any bodily stuff on there. You just literally want, hey, they live in here. You don't want to come back, because some people might think it's, something like, oh my God, it's gross. I have to sleep on the same bed. Listen, there's ways around that in which you can basically have another bed that you can, another mattress that you can bring in, and you can hide one mattress, another, somewhere else, and then when they leave, you come back and put your mattress back. And then you're like, well, that's too much work. I don't want to do that. No, I'm just gonna rent out the place. They furnish it however they furnish, and then they pay me my rent. That's fine. That's what I want to do. I want to do a landlord. That's perfectly fine. We're going to look at the arguments for that, right? We're going to look at the argument is the landlord way? How does the landlord, if you want to do it from a perspective of, okay, I want to do rental income, does that actually work, right? So we're going to go ahead and look at the stats, right, guys? We're going to go ahead and dive. As you guys know, I like to look at it to show you all how I think it goes. New lyrics. Okay, so let's look at it from a perspective of here, right? So we're going to calculate everything, because now when you're looking at this is now let's factor in how much is the cost of your loan, how much is your rent, how much. Now you're actually doing some actual math. So the way I was able to do this is I went to calculator.net. You can find them online, calculator.net. You'll be able to calculate this, right? So let's look at it from a perspective of the average. Let's look at it and say, remember, let's look at Miami. Let's look at it from a perspective of Miami, right? So the average home value price in Miami. I know you guys were like, Miami is kind of insane. So what is the average house cost in Miami? So the average house cost in Miami is around $675,000, right? Whew. Oh yeah. All right. So we'll use 674. The median home sold for 530. So let's use something like 500 grand. Let's come back in here and let's plug in 500,000, right? So we're gonna plug in 500. Yeah, 500. You're using a loan. Most people use a loan. Okay. So what's the current interest rate on the loan? So the current interest rate, obviously it all varies on credit and your down payments on a home loan. Okay, the average. We're just gonna look at the average. Okay, so right now, based off of this, jeez, that's crazy. That's a 20-year fix is 7.6. So everything's right now. Let's say it's about we're mortgage. So right now on a home 30-year fixed loan. Let's do a 30-year fixed loan, because most people do a 30-year fixed loan. So if you're doing oh my God, 7.99%. Woo! Jeez. Woo! Damn. Woohoo! 7.99%. All right. Jeez. Oh my God. I'm even scared to put in those numbers. Let's put 7%. Most people are like, oh my God, man, that's not that high. Well, no, it's high. It's high. 500,000. Now, I always recommend this, guys. If you don't put, we're gonna go off of the average of 20% down. Most people put less. I'm gonna say just put 20% down. Save up the money, because if you don't now, we're gonna look at the factors. So let's look at it from a perspective. Let's say I put 5% of 500 grand down, right? So I put so 10% is 50 grand. Put 25 grand. So I put 20 grand down, 25 grand down, right? And 25 grand down. Need repairs? No. Closing costs. Let's say my closing cost was we'll say about 14,000. Right? And we'll just leave all this stuff the same. Calculating costs. Let's leave all these things the same. And if we go ahead and calculate this, okay. So based off of this, this is just going to basically say the 4 to 20 year. This is just the breakdown, right? So we have a $500,000 house. The expenses is 6,000. So the first year we're negative, okay. We're 2,000. So let's say the rent will be, actually let's do this. Let's do this a little bit better, because based on this math, you're already in a net loss. So let's be reasonable here. Let's say we're not using a $500,000 house. Let's say we're doing a $200,000 house, because if we're doing a $500,000 house, right, unless your rent has to be $5,000 at least per month, it has to be $5,000 per month, because if anything less than that, you messed up. Because on a $5,000 house, okay, now you have a decent cash flow of $5,000 on rent. So unless your rent's $5,000, so you're looking at mortgage is $3,792. Sounds about right. So let's look at the math here. So now we look at the fact that your mortgage is $3,792 because you have 5% down. Now let's look at it from a perspective of, let's say I now put 20% down, okay, and I put 20% down, and I calculate it now. Now my mortgage is $3,193, right? This makes a significant difference, because that's what, $780 extra per month. So this makes a significant difference. Plus, if you put, oh yeah, that's why. Because I was like, what? Okay. All right. So this is the annual mortgage, 31,935. I was like, yeah, that's why the math was not basically, but the math was not math. And 6,700, and cash flow is about 18,365. Definitely go play around with this calculator, guys. So if you're looking at a cash flow of about cash on return, you return about 16.11%. That's your cash on return right there, right? So 500,000, $5,000 a month, 20% down. Closing costs 40 grand. You're still looking at a position in which by the end of your cash flow, monthly cash flow is roughly about $1,530. Annually, you're making about 18 grand. So your net operating income, your NOI basically is about $4,191.67, and your annual net operating income is about $50,300. That's still not bad because it's still fairly reasonable. So it's still income. That's what it's saying. It's still income. It's still income of NOI of about 4,191, right? So if you guys don't know what is my net operating income, I'm going to say what is the definition of net operating income. So I could show you. So net it's just basically how do you so to basically think about net is a calculation basically. So NOI it says all right. So look at definition. So net operating income is a calculation used to analyze the profitability of income generating real estate investments. NOI equals all revenue from the property minus all reasonably necessary expenses. Right. So pretty much everything, all the reasonable expenses, you subtract that, you pretty much have your revenue. NOI is basically is a before tax figure, so which means you while you're doing mostly with property taxes and you're also getting income, so obviously you got to report that in a way as income as well. But you can depreciate. Now we're kind of getting a little technical, but you can depreciate your operating expenses towards income to reduce your tax bill to basically almost zero if the need be, right? But you guys look at it from a perspective of, Miami, I know it's an extreme of rent of about $5,000, which is pretty good, but most people are not in a position in which their rent is $5,000 because most people, the average mortgage, if we let's just go ahead and be reasonable with this, okay? I know I was kind of a little bit extra with that, but let's be reasonable with this and say, the average, let's say the average home of 200,000, okay, and the rent is $2,000, and they put 2% down, everything still stays the same, and let's put a closing cost of about $6,000, and we calculate that right now, so cash flow, if you're doing about $2,000 per month, right? Paying your mortgage about 1,064, your cash flow is roughly about 277 is what you're making. That's what you actually cash flow. That's your cash flow. That's what you're getting every month. And then what do you call it? And 3,000 is your annual cash flow off of one door. So the only way to basically make this, because you got to think about, you're making $270 a month, okay? $270 a month. Because you got to also factor the fact that if something breaks on a rental property, you're responsible for fixing it. You are responsible for fixing it if something breaks. If you hire a property management company, they take a cut, they take a percentage of it. So if they're taking a percentage of it, anything else comes out of pocket. Now it's going to take about 4 years for you to build enough where you can take out your initial cash flow, initial down payment of 20%. Take it out, and now you're pretty much in a cash flow positive, almost like it's pretty much paid for itself. Now you can choose whichever one you want. The Airbnb is obviously more of an active because you actually have to go, or you can hire a cleaning service that can clean and to make sure everything's ready for the next guest. That's pretty simple to do, but you also will make more money. It's also got to factor in the fact as to Airbnbs are mostly seasonal because if I'm a New Yorker, I'll probably have an Airbnb for the winter in Florida. If I'm kind of things like that, you got to think about it. And Airbnbs, you got to think about the location as well, because an Airbnb in Idaho is probably not going to perform the same as an Airbnb in LA, right? Because there's a few factors that come into play. But as far as it is taking into account who your customers are, who the location is, and also you got to think about it as far as the home you're going to be, what's the location of the home you're going to be purchasing to do for this Airbnb? There's a really great amount of cash flow to make, and you can make money faster with an Airbnb than you can make money actually with a normal rental property. So that's probably what I would do. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think, and feel free to like and share this video with someone you believe that gets any value from this. And obviously, it's an absolute pleasure to bring this to you guys. And obviously, don't forget to sub to the